The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
How do we define a living wage? General definition is living wage is a wage sort of high enough to maintain a normal standard of living, sort of vague, okay? So how can we make it more specific? Well, living wage means you can afford shelter, food, and basic necessities of life without using more than 30% of your income towards housing alone. So a study was done by the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and it points out, maybe not surprisingly, but really disappointingly, that no one in the United States working full-time, making the minimum wage, can afford a two-bedroom apartment in any of the 50 states of the United States of America. Not in Arkansas, not in Wyoming, in no U.S. state, regardless of cost of living, based on the federal minimum wage. Working full-time at the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour is roughly $15,000 a year. Full-time minimum wage workers anywhere in the country would have to make about twice that in order to afford a two-bedroom apartment. An American making the federal minimum wage of $7.25 would have to work 95 hours a week or more than two full-time jobs to afford a two-bedroom apartment. If you're a single mom working 40 hours a week at minimum wage and you want to have your own room, tough luck. Alaska, Washington, Colorado, Florida, Virginia, Illinois, you have to make over $20 an hour to afford at full-time a two-bedroom apartment. In California, you've got to make $30 an hour to be able to afford a two-bedroom apartment. In Washington, D.C., $33 an hour. In Hawaii, $35 an hour. And as you're going to see here, almost anywhere you're going to find something that's near the threshold. You are going to need to earn, according to this graphic, $21.21 on average to afford a two-bedroom apartment. Why can't these people just stop being so poor, Pat, and pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, damn it?
Yeah, or live in a one-bedroom apartment, I guess?
Yeah, that's right. Well, anytime a study like this is done, you hear right-wingers and people who say we should have no minimum wage or it shouldn't be any higher. They say, why do all these people need two-bedroom apartments anyway?
Yeah.
I mean, why? Everybody should just live in a one-bedroom apartment.
I mean, it makes sense if you live in New York City or Boston or San Francisco, places where the rent is so high because there's a lot of income disparity and there's a tech industry there. But if you're in the middle of the country, say you're in Wyoming, you should be able to afford that. Working 40 hours a week, you deserve it.
You've got to applaud states like Illinois and New York that are introducing a $15 minimum wage. But it's still not enough for a two-bedroom apartment in many parts of those states. Properties are also overvalued in the United States in general, but lawmakers, that's a sort of different issue lawmakers can look at. There are many places in the country where a full-time minimum wage job won't even get you a dignified one-bedroom apartment, and you're sort of alluding to that, Pat. Many people naively look around at this $15 minimum wage proposal and they say, oh my God, it's some radical communist abstraction that's crazy. It's now part of the DNC platform for good reason, even though Hillary Clinton, for some reason, wanted a $12 rather than a $15 minimum wage. We can probably thank Bernie Sanders, at least in part, for that. But it's still not even that much.
Right. And this isn't an entitlement or a handout. You're working for this money. And if you work a 40-hour-a-week job, I mean, you should be able to afford basic things like food, like healthcare,
absolutely,
like shelter. I mean, that's first and foremost.
If we want to think about this in one other way, and I think you probably can predict where I'm going because I've talked about this before, basic income, right? Even if we don't increase the minimum wage or restructure other aspects of the economy and work culture, forget about all of that. Even just a $750 a month basic income, which is $9,000 per year, which is sort of on the low end, right? I would like to see more done as a basic income, but let's say you did that. Even that would push many, many people, not everyone by any means, given how much housing costs in many parts of this country, but that would push many people closer to being able to actually afford housing. And let me mention something else. The reason for this 30% limit, right? The idea is you don't spend more than 30% of your income on housing. The reason for that limit is because of some of the other expenses people have. If we moved in the direction of single-payer healthcare and disconnected health insurance from work, you could also then make housing more affordable for people just by virtue of not having to reserve as much money for healthcare.
And the minimum wage also brings up a conversation about corporate welfare, because if you have companies out there like Walmart paying their workers $7.25 an hour, those people still have to get by, and they're going to do so based on government programs that may be food stamps, that may be public housing. So in a roundabout sort of way, we're paying for their corporate profits.
Absolutely. And this is something we've talked about before, which is you have many of these businesses which are touted as the sort of be-all, end-all of efficiency and profitability and the American dream because they employ so many people. Yeah, they employ so many people at, in many cases, below subsistence level wages. And how is that money being made up? It's being made up by government programs, which are funded by your tax dollars. So this idea that people have of it's a great business decision how Walmart and other companies have structured, and they're totally self-sufficient. They're not self-sufficient. Many of their employees would literally die if it weren't for the fact that they're making up some money, either in terms of welfare programs, food stamps, whatever the case may be, Medicaid, through taxpayer-funded government welfare programs. If you eliminate that, McDonald's and Walmart are far less viable as businesses.
But of course, a right-winger would say, well, we should just take out food stamps and public housing and all these social safety nets to begin with, but then why even have a government? Untenable.
And, however you want to approach the solutions to this problem, and reasonable people can differ about the best way to approach it, this is not sustainable. That's what I think many people are missing, sort of going about their day like there's something even remotely sustainable about this, when there isn't. It's going to break one way or another. It's sort of already breaking, and it's broken already for many, many people. Send me your thoughts about this. What do you think? I'm on Twitter at @DPacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Talk to me there.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Richard Dumontier. Richard, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. We do depend directly, not in some indirect, vague, or amorphous sense. We depend directly on the support of members like Richard, and I encourage you to sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Long list of member benefits you can get. You can also make a pledge at Patreon by going to patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Let's go to the phone lines, which are very, very busy already. We are going to start with our first caller, maybe from here in the Boston area, going to a caller from the 617 area code. Caller, tell us your name, where you're calling from, and you can jump right into your topic.
Could you hear me?
We can hear you fine, yeah.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure just that there was a lot of static. My name is Terry. I'm from Newton, Massachusetts. I called about a few months ago with a question about Justice Democrats and all that too. I really liked your answer you gave. And today I just wanted to call, since especially with the Jon Ossoff loss from yesterday, it seems like the Democrats just seem to be, like, especially on the national level, just really seem to not understand their constituency. And especially now that with talks about 2018 and 2020 and all that too, I just figured, like, it looks like the Democrats are going to really need someone to look as their role model. And, everyone's talking about like Bernie Sanders, but I've just been curious about kind of like what you think about Tulsi Gabbard and all that. I know you often talk about
let's deal with the Ossoff thing first. Okay. So out of curiosity, do you know, in the last many elections in Georgia's 6th district, do you know roughly how much of the vote the Democratic challenger received in that district?
Usually about 40%, to the best of my knowledge.
About 33%. They were typically losing to Tom Price by about 2-1. Do you know what percentage of the vote Jon Ossoff received in that race?
48.
48%, right. So I do agree with you, and I've been talking for a while, Terry, that Democrats need more for 2018 and 2020 than just "we're not Trump," because that could backfire in 3 or 4 different ways, which I've outlined. However, I don't think that the Georgia 6th district lost, and I talked about this on the show when it happened. I don't think it's as bad as some people are pointing out, because Ossoff actually got a record share of the vote for a Democrat. And I think a lot of people don't realize that this was just an upside down red district that Tom Price was just crushing in for years and years. So that's one aspect, Pat. I'm not saying Terry's wrong. Like, yeah. Democrats need a progressive leader. There's questions about what's going to be the platform. But the Ossoff thing is not the end of the world.
I think there were two valid ways to look at it. And certainly if Ossoff won, that would have been a huge win and a huge upset. But you have to remember that this is a ruby red district, used to be represented by Newt Gingrich, nice rich suburbs. So, it's going to be in Republican control for 2 more years. Yeah.
So, Terry, I agree with you, and I've been talking about it, and I'm going to continue talking about it. But I would not freak out about the Ossoff loss.
Yeah. Personally, I wasn't too excited for Ossoff. It's just that I really found Handel to be, I don't even know what to say. I know that the Humanist Report did a really big segment on how Handel's out of touch stance on whether we should have a livable minimum wage.
Yeah.
It's disappointing, but it's it's not the end of the world.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But personally, I'm hoping if especially with Tulsi Gabbard's kind of rising up in the ranks and all that too, that there's at least some way we could diversify the progressive camp's leadership, because I think right now everyone's talking about Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, and especially by capitalizing on those two, the problem we have is A, they're kind of a little bit older, and B, especially since they attract a lot of millennials, it's very important to have more younger leaders and all that too. And I think Ossoff may have helped in that regard, but I do think that just saying Bernie 2020 or Warren 2020 isn't going to cut it for the Democrats.
I got you, Terry. All right. Thanks very much. Appreciate the call. Very, very good point and point well made. Let's go to the phones and take our next caller from the 323 area code. Caller from 323, please introduce yourself and jump right in here.
Hey, David. My name's Cameron, and I'm calling you from Los Angeles.
Great. What's on your mind?
I was interested in knowing how you guys felt about having more third parties involved in the two-party system and ranged voting.
Well, ranked voting, these two issues, I'm glad you're asking about them together because they need to be thought of together. I don't believe that you are going to see a significant pickup for third-party candidates until you have ranked choice voting, because the risk to supporting a third-party candidate is that you actually end up helping the candidate you're most ideologically opposed to. So Maine has passed ranked choice voting. I believe there's one other state, Pat. I don't remember which that we reported. Which
of course,
is
Maine for state elections, not the federal ones.
Not for the federal election, yeah. It might have been Nebraska, again, for state. I might be wrong about that. So I actually believe that it would be great to have more diversity of voices. I just think unless you completely upend campaign finance to begin with, and really unless you instate ranked choice voting, you're not going to see third parties make large headway. And for people who don't know, by ranked choice voting, what we mean is, let's say that the third party candidate is your preferred candidate. But by voting for them, let's imagine a real scenario. You want to vote for the Green Party. If the Green Party candidate is not going to win, you'd rather the Democrat than the Republican. But of course, because you're just voting once, you vote for the Green Party candidate. That's a vote the Democrat doesn't get. That's now one vote that potentially has helped the Republican win. With ranked choice voting, you could rank the Green Party candidate 1 and the Democrat 2. If after an initial summing up of round 1 votes, the Green Party candidate is not viable, you go to people's second choice votes, and your vote is shifted towards the Democrat. And I think, Cameron, you're thinking about this issue in exactly the right way, and ranked choice voting is just huge right now as a political opportunity for third parties.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, because I actually started a third party in California, and my first piece that I'm trying to pass is something that involves more ranked choice voting in the state.
All right, very good. Well, you keep at it there, and
what's the name of the party?
Oh, we lost him already. Yeah, I think that certainly might have been something.
It's a good question.
It's a fair question. Yes, unfortunately, we did not get to that one today. Let's continue taking calls. We are going next to our caller from the 705 area code. Caller in 705. What's your name and what's your question today?
Hi, David. My name is Lyle. I'm just calling from Sudbury, Ontario.
Great. What's on your mind?
Canada. Just wanted to talk about. Just wanted to talk about. Obviously about Donald Trump, but just his thoughts on Twitter. It's unreal, pretty much. Just how this guy is 70 plus years old, and he's basically changed the whole aspect of, like, because when we're younger, we're looking at like MySpace, we have Pixel, we have all these social media things we had when we were younger, and we're going, no, we're going to grow up. We're going to get over that. Now, this guy's 70 years old, 70 plus. I don't even know how old he is.
71 now.
And he's got his surrogate. Yeah, there you go. He's got his surrogates, to quote you, Kellyanne Conme, coming on all the time, just toting all this 100 million followers over Facebook, over his social media platforms. It's like, I just find it so pathetic that that this is their talking point. It's unbelievable. And I just wanted to get your idea on, well, that's one idea, but I believe a couple of years ago, Twitter had done a thing where they went through all of the fake accounts and eliminated them. So it really kind of exposed certain popular, like Kim Kardashian, for example, lost 20 million followers or something like that. I was wondering if they could potentially do something like that, expose this guy and shut up, to use some language there, shut up Kellyanne Conme with these talking points.
Yeah, so that's been done. Twitter Audit looked at, if you look at Trump's account on Twitter Audit, it claims that roughly half of his followers are fake. Now, I don't know how accurate that is. Like, it says 7% of my followers are fake, so I think that some fraction of it is accounts that, like you said, it's not that they're fake, but it's accounts that have been closed. Because some part of that happens. But you know, right. I think your first point is the most interesting one, which is it's sort of weird for a 71-year-old to be so focused on tweeting at 3 a.m. whether or not they're president of the United States, Pat. It's even weirder when the person obsessed, when the 71-year-old obsessed with tweeting at 3 a.m. happens to be president of the United States. That's really odd.
Especially when it's been proven time and time again that this is bad for him, and that he's undermining his own lawyers and his own policy proposals.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that they're staging interventions to try to get him to stop using Twitter and those aren't working, it's really concerning.
All right, Lyle, thanks very much. We've got to run. I appreciate the call, appreciate the topic. Very, very interesting, and hope to hear from you again. We will continue. Let's go next to our caller from the 724 area code. Caller in 724, what's your name, where are you calling from, and what's your question today?
Hi, my name is Roger. I'm calling from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Great.
And I was told by a few of my friends that they think that as part of James Comey's testimony, they think some of the stuff he had said about Pence knowing about some things that may block Pence from becoming president if Trump is to get impeached.
Yeah, well, this is a very relevant question, and we talked about this earlier in the week when I reported that Mike Pence himself has retained a personal lawyer in the Trump-Russia stuff. This is sort of a fundamental question, Pat. When we think about the impeachment or resignation of Donald Trump, does Mike Pence become president, and then what happens? And how implicated is Mike Pence in whatever is the full extent of the Trump-Russia scandal? I wouldn't be shocked, whether it's true or not, to see Pence turn his back on Trump if it gets really ugly and say, listen, they brought me in when all this Russia stuff was going on. I didn't participate in any of it. They wouldn't keep me in the loop. I'm clean here. It's already a little hard to believe, only because it appears that Pence was aware of the distortions that Michael Flynn was involved in.
Maybe. I mean, we don't even have allegations directly against Mike Pence.
We
at
don't
this
right
point,
now.
You know?
We don't
I
right
mean,
now, yeah.
You'd have to start with that position first. We have that with Mike Flynn. We have that with Paul Manafort. Not so much for Mike Pence.
Yeah, no, but I think your question, Roger, is spot on, which is we don't know the answer to that, and that is going to become, if this progresses, that's going to become a bigger and bigger issue. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the call. Really, really appreciate it. A very important topic, and one that I think we will have to at some point follow again very, very closely. Let's go to our next caller, Pat, why don't we? We're taking calls at 617-830-4750. Our next caller comes to us from the 615 area code. Caller, what's your name and where are you calling from today? And feel free to jump right into your question if you want.
All right. My name is Logan, and I'm calling from Tennessee.
Great. What's on your mind?
And I just wanted to ask, I know that... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was just calling to ask, I noticed that after the election there was a really large uptick in left-wing organizations' memberships, like Socialist Alternative and Democratic Socialists of America and other organizations. And I was wondering if Justice Democrats in the long run are going to have to adopt more radical left-wing policies in order to get this new youth section of the vote that's developing. That's policies like worker ownership of needs of the workplace, democratically deciding business decisions and other things like that.
It's a good question. I mean, number one, I know that groups like the ACLU have grown significantly since the election. I'm not aware of the groups you're talking about's membership growth, but let's just take it as part of the premise of the question that is happening. I don't really know what the Justice Democrats' positions are on a lot of these things, so it's hard for me to answer as far as that. I mean, I think that the point you're getting at is a good one, which is the Democratic Party is going to need to move away from being what I call Democrats Incorporated, Democrats Inc., and really incorporate what are the more emerging ideas of the younger Democratic voters for two reasons. One, that's a larger and larger share of the electorate every election cycle. And number two, because otherwise they're going to risk pushing voters towards the Republican Party or the Libertarian Party or into not voting at all because they don't feel that the party represents them. So I think that there's a big turning point here, Pat, for Democrats, where I've been talking about the specific issues that I think they should look at. And of course, I've never been a Democrat, but I typically vote for Democrats when you've got a Democrat and a Republican that are the viable candidates. Yeah. I'm way to the left of the average of the Democratic Party. The Democrats need to take some issues and really take progressive stances on them here.
I don't think you can go too far to the left to where you're getting to this radical ideology thing that the caller is suggesting, because then you abandon folks in the middle.
Yeah,
I mean, the heart and the spirit of the party is really this Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard wing right now, Elizabeth Warren, all of them.
Yeah, there's no chance that the Democratic Party is going to go the way of anarcho-socialism, right? I mean, it's just not going to happen, and it's not clear that that would actually be good because you may lose more people than you bring in with that idea. But it's got to move to the left, at least in terms of its public-facing platform. And I think you're thinking about it the right way, Logan. I hope I've addressed your question.
You have, and I think you guys are definitely right. Where you can't go too far too fast, but you know, who knows? Maybe in a generation things will be completely different.
Yep. All right, Logan. Thanks very much. Appreciate the call. That is going to do it for live calls for today. Thanks to everybody who called in. We will one day take calls again. That I can promise you, folks.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
For today's classic interview, we're going back to my interview in October of 2014 with Bill Bowring. And I don't think I really have to explain the relevance of this interview to you. This interview was about how did Putin's Russia become Putin's Russia? And we talked about a lot of aspects of Vladimir Putin's past and most recent escapades. And I think it's particularly interesting given what we now know about Vladimir Putin that we didn't know in October of 2014, to rewatch this interview. So we'll get right into it. My interview with Bill Bowring from 2014 How did Vladimir Putin's Russia become what it is? I'm joined today by Professor Bill Bowring, who is Professor of Law at the Birkbeck University of London, also author of Law, Rights, and Ideology in Russia, Landmarks in the Destiny of a Great Power. It's really great to have you on, and I think a lot of our audience is very aware of the last 2 to 4 to maybe 10 years of history in Russia. They're, of course, following, as we are, some of the moves that have been made by Vladimir Putin. But most people don't have a sense of how, going all the way back several hundred years, what we're seeing today in Russia connects to an ideology and a framework from years past. So let's start laying it out as broadly as possible. What was the catalyst, as you may call it, that set Russia on the path which we're now observing?
Well, I'd like to go back to the 16th century when you had Ivan the Terrible, Ivan IV in Moscow, and Queen Elizabeth I in England. And actually, that's when you have the beginning of Russia, Moscow and then Russia, as a great continental empire, and the beginning of England as a worldwide maritime empire. That was really England's defeat of the Spanish. And what a lot of people don't know is that Ivan the Terrible proposed marriage to Elizabeth I, and she told him to get lost. But something which I often stress is that England and Russia have been on the same side of practically every war, with the exception of the Crimean War. And in fact, the two empires grew in a way which didn't really lead to conflict, because Russia was spreading across the Eurasian continent, Britain was spreading around the world through sea power. And both Russia and Britain are suffering at the present moment from a deep psychological trauma, which is the loss of empire in the really quite recent past.
And is that what you feel is today a great driver or catalyst for the more, we have these kind of conflicting sides within Russia, right? There's the westernizers, and as we saw, that was certainly a big issue in the conflict with Ukraine and involving Crimea. And then you have those who are more kind of the Slavophiles, or the I don't know what other term there may be. But for a long time, there have been these two camps, have there not?
Well, I would say the ideology of the present regime in Russia, the ideology, is that what unites Putin and the people around him is that they want Russia to be a great power and to be recognized and respected as such around the world. So I would say the Russian leadership see the world in geopolitical terms, and therefore the interpretation of what's been happening in Ukraine from the Russian regime's point of view is that Russia is encircled by the United States and its allies, and Ukraine was really a step too far for NATO in particular. So I think that's not the only factor, but I think that explains quite a bit of the way that the Russian regime has been acting.
I find it very interesting that with some countries, there is a kind of less circuitous history with regard to the direction that the country has gone in than Russia. And if you look, of course, we have in World War II, Russia's influence with the Allies, and we know about that. But even going back further, during the 1860s, we saw the abolition of serfdom. We saw the introduction of the jury trial. These were reforms that we saw in Russia that may not necessarily always be associated with the kind of public face of Vladimir Putin today.
I think this is extremely important. And actually, Alexander II abolished serfdom in 1861, several years before the United States abolished slavery. And why did he do that, which was a massive step? It was because Russia had been defeated in the Crimean War by Britain and France. And that was just a huge shock, because after the defeat of Napoleon, we tend to forget that the Russian army marched all the way to Paris, defeating Napoleon on the way. So after 1812, they arrived in Paris in 1814, marched through Paris in extremely good order, and went home again, having done the job. So Russia, after 1814, thought it was invincible. And then to lose the Crimean War not very many years later, that was a massive shock. And so we had the huge legal reforms, and in fact, jury trial, introduced in 1864 throughout the whole of the Russian Empire. That continued right up until 1917. And one of the big steps in Russia since the collapse of the Soviet Union has been the reintroduction of jury trial throughout Russia. And we also tend to forget that Putin, in the first 3 years that he was president, so up until he arrested Mr. Khodorkovsky in 2003, he actually cited the great legal reformers of the 19th century and presented himself as being the heir of Alexander II. So, and that went into reverse. The other side, of course, of what Putin was doing between 2000 and 2003 was the Second Chechen War, which was absolutely vicious. But within Russia itself, there were very serious legal reforms, including the reintroduction of jury trial.
What do you think is mostly responsible, if it's even possible to sum things up? I mean, of course, there's so many facets to this, but how would you characterize the primary catalyst for what we've seen happen within Russia over the last 6 to 8 to 10 years? Do you think that this is an issue of a desire to maintain this kind of caricature of Russian sovereignty, which clearly has been an important thing, at least in kind of this theoretical way, to Vladimir Putin? Or how would you assess the catalyzing factors for the recent decade or so of Russian policy?
Well, I would say the key factor is that Russia and China, of course, many Russians look at China very closely, followed very different paths. So Russia went for really dismantling the Soviet system with a wholesale attack on the Communist Party in the early years of Boris Yeltsin, really as the first step before liberalizing the economy, whereas, of course, China went the other way and kept the iron control of the Communist Party as the basis for liberalizing the economy. So very different paths. And of course, in Russia during the 1990s, there was absolute chaos with a president who was drinking a quart of vodka every day and was frequently drunk in public. So people look back at that kind of wild period of the 1990s with horror. So a lot of the secret of Putin has been that you have an individual who is sober, who presents himself as being a strong man, who's a black belt in judo. And of course, he has been very fortunate because up until very recently, we've had very high oil prices. And that has actually funded a situation in Russia where, of course, a few people get ridiculously rich, but everybody has become better off. And people have actually been paid on time until this year, when oil prices, of course, have gone through the floor. And once again in Russia, there's a very serious situation. If I could just say a word about ideology here, which is that you mentioned sovereignty, very, very important. So if you want to know what is the ideological slogan, as it were, of the regime, it is sovereignty and sovereign democracy. This is the invention of a chap called Surkov, who is he's a younger generation, very much the ideologist of the regime. And in 2006, a book was published called Sovereignty, Suverenitet, edited by one of the group of young conservatives around Putin, and with chapters by Putin, Medvedev, Surkov, edited by a young conservative called Garaja. And the theoretical center of this book, bizarrely, is the thought of the Nazi legal theorist Carl Schmitt. And the central chapter is by the leading Russian expert on Carl Schmitt, who translates his work from German into Russian, called Sovereignty as a Political Choice. There you are. I think that is right at the center of the thinking of the regime in Russia at the moment.
Well, and it's fascinating because in a place as different from the United States as Russia, you still see this caricature of sovereignty and this calling card of sovereignty being used in a way that is not that different. As we've seen here in the US, groups like the Tea Party and anarcho-libertarian groups co-opting this concept of sovereignty also for their own political gain. And while the groups could not be more different than the political forces in Russia, you can't help but see the similarity there.
Well, I mean, I think it's very interesting that some of those people really admire what Putin is doing at the moment.
They do. That's actually interesting. They do admire it, yeah.
And that's because of his very pronounced conservative turn since 2012. And what I find very interesting is that Medvedev, of course, during his 4 years as president, he was ultimately under the control of Putin, nonetheless introduced some liberal reforms and brought some liberals into government. And since Putin came back in 2012, all of that is being dismantled, mostly has been dismantled. And the people Medvedev brought in have been got rid of. And there's only one left, who's the Minister of Justice, Mr. Konovalov. And really, this is a whole series of things, but amongst them, of course, social conservatism. So on the question of the attitude towards homosexuals and gays, LBTI, etc., Putin has taken a radically conservative turn, which is welcomed by many conservatives in Europe and the United States.
No question about it. We've been speaking with Professor Bill Bowring. The book is Law, Rights, and Ideology in Russia, Landmarks in the Destiny of a Great Power. Really great to have you on. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed that. Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let's get into audience questions. I know Pat has been eagerly waiting to answer at least a couple of these. He, I think, has some good stories for us. Yeah. But we're going to start with Mason. Mason wrote in, what one unsolved mystery would you solve if you could? I have two different answers on this. One of them is, let's figure out if Jesus was really born to a woman who had never had sex, died and was resurrected, and is the Son of God or a representative of God on earth. Because I feel like so much conflict on our planet stems from that if we could get down to the bottom of it, if that's true, then you would see many people convert to Christianity because they would say, hey, you know what? We've got proof that Jesus is God / the Son of God. And if we can debunk that, then you would see Christianity presumably dissolve, not completely. There would be those who would say, obviously, to their last breath, that it was staged, the debunking was staged or whatever. But I think that that's an unsolved mystery that, by virtue of its solving, could maybe improve life on earth for a lot of people. What about that?
Yeah, of course. And I mean, we don't even know for sure, of course, that Jesus lived. I mean, I think it's a fair assumption to say that he did. But yeah, I mean, regardless of what you think of him and what religion you follow, Jesus Christ is probably the most influential person in all of human history.
Whether you're Christian or not, the stories around Jesus are influencing your life in one way or another. For most people, I would say. Yeah. Either by absence or by their presence in your life. Do you have one that you'd like to solve? I'll say one other one. I mean, broadly, I would love to solve the question of the origins of the universe and life within it. That's sort of a major mystery. Yeah. I know I'm going beyond whether Paul McCartney was killed and replaced with a British left-handed bassist who sings and sounds just like him at some point 45, 50 years ago. I'm going a little bigger than that, but that's the unsolved mystery, isn't it?
Right. I mean, there's so many different roads you can go down here. I mean, one path is conspiracy theories, another path is maybe like paranormal experiences. When I was in Edinburgh, Scotland, I visited a series of underground tunnels where they used to bury and trap people who were infected with diseases. Sure. And there's this legend of a poltergeist there, and people will come out of these tunnels with scratches and bruises all over themselves. Now, some attributed this to a ghost. Others just say, well, you're in a dark room. Of course, you can bump into stuff that can happen.
Sometimes the simplest explanation is the one that we should favor, and maybe that applies in that case.
Occam's razor.
I also would love to solve the mystery of what happened with Building 7. I mean, when are we going to get answers, Pat, as to what happened with Building 7 on that fateful day in 2001?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think a debris falling from two massive skyscrapers onto it unexpectedly would have any impact on the structure's integrity, would it?
And that's why we need answers, Pat,
Yes.
because there was thermite paint in those buildings. And anyway,
it wasn't even top page news of the day.
I know. Yeah,
You
it's
know?
hard to believe that. It's crazy. Any others? I don't know. I mean, there's certainly sort of medical mysteries. I don't mean specifically like guy has a 100-pound tumor in his testicles and it goes away with homeopathy. I'm not talking faith healing, or I don't mean that, but I mean broader medical questions about the future of medicine. But those aren't really mysteries. They're sort of as yet unknowns, I guess you would call them.
Are there any popular conspiracy theories that you're at least willing to entertain? Like with this assassination of JFK one, I don't think it was, orchestrated by Lyndon Johnson or anything, but I think it's entirely possible that there was more than one shooter aside from Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, I don't know. I've read a lot about that, and I don't believe that there was more than one shooter at this time.
I mean, it could have just been a hell of a shot, Could have been a hell. Here's the thing with a lot, and we're kind of diverting a little bit, but sometimes with these conspiracy theories, and we're not talking about conspiracy theories, not unsolved mysteries, you will have 99 pieces of evidence that paint a cohesive narrative. And then someone will bring one piece of evidence or asserted evidence that doesn't coincide with that. The logical thing would be, that's interesting, but we still have these other 99 pieces of evidence that among themselves still paint the same picture. Conspiracy theorists will sometimes say, well, the one piece of evidence alone makes the other 99 irrelevant and obviously untrue. That's not really logical. That's not really a logical approach that I find sometimes when you get that one thing that doesn't fit into the overall story or narrative that we've built about something. But anyway, we're kind of going in another direction. Jesus and the origins of the universe maybe would be the two unsolved mysteries that I would like to solve. Lily wrote in saying, what is the worst crime you've ever committed that you've gotten away with? Now, this is interesting because due to, some would argue, over-criminalization, but also due to the impossibility of knowing every single statute at all times, and of sometimes just acting out of ignorance, most people have committed some crimes. There is probably petty theft that lots of people have committed, not with intent to commit a crime, but they've committed some kind of petty theft. Or jaywalking.
Sure, jaywalking, although I believe that's a civil infraction, but yes, nonetheless, thank you. I think that is one that most of us, especially if you live in cities, have committed. Insurance fraud. I've probably committed what would on paper be considered insurance fraud in the sense that my car was once broken into, and I had to make estimates about the items that were lost. At the time I had, I was younger and I had a whole audio, I had a system in my car with like big subwoofers and all that type of stuff. And a lot of CDs at the time when you had CDs, and CDs at the time were $15 a pop. And I made estimates about the value of those items. They were probably high estimates. And is that insurance fraud? I mean, I did, in a sense, deceive my insurance company at the time as to the value of the items. Is that the most serious crime I've committed?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Fraud. I mean, you're supposed to be as honest as you possibly can when filing your taxes, report every single amount of income that you've gotten over the course of the year. But does everyone follow that to the letter of the law? Sure.
And there are instances with tax fraud where it is considered criminal. There are times when if you acted out of true ignorance, then it would not be considered criminal, but you would still be civilly liable to make the IRS whole based on underpayment. So I really don't know what the worst crime I've committed is that I've gotten away with, if we're not talking about civil infractions like speeding or whatever the case may be. Can you think of one that you've committed?
Okay, so when I was 16 years old, my group of friends decided not to go home to sleep for the night for whatever reason. I can't remember why. Maybe because we were 16 and being stupid. We decided to break into another one of our friends' house because he was away on vacation.
Okay.
He was at Cape Cod for the week. We just assumed his whole family would be there with him. We were able to get in through the garage doors, so of course that's breaking and entering. And once we were in the basement, we decided to just enjoy ourselves, right? Play video games.
Sure.
Maybe things were smoked. Maybe things were drank. I don't know, because we were underage. This may or may not have happened.
Sure.
Naturally, we start to get hungry. So we decide to venture out from just the basement up the staircase. Now, when we get to the kitchen, we start grabbing the snacks and all that stuff. And then we realize that someone had left some prescription medication out on the table. So we assume that you don't just leave that out if you're going away on vacation for a week. Someone's home. And sure enough, someone was home.
Okay.
And we just had to make sure of that. We didn't decide to leave right away like a smart person would do. We decided to stick around. And we went up the staircase, and to our dismay and to our horror, we hear the sounds of a snoring man. So this entire time, we were just enjoying ourselves, having the time of our life in this man's basement while he was home. I think that's easily far and away the worst crime I've ever committed.
Yeah, I mean, really the only crime, you guys didn't take the prescription medicine, right?
No, I mean,
so I
breaking
think,
and entering while someone's home. I mean, in some states, he would have had legal justification to shoot us dead.
Sure. Not in Massachusetts, right?
No.
I don't know. Did you check with, Pat has police in his family. Did you, after the fact, check how serious your crime was?
I didn't. I've not told my family this. No.
Oh,
no
okay.
way.
All right.
No,
Geez.
they don't know about
Wow.
this.
Well, hopefully this
hopefully
segment isn't your undoing. Yeah. All right. Very interesting. Well, Lily, I think Pat's story is certainly more interesting than mine. I did once, before I was 18, drive after midnight and was pulled over by a police officer. And I had people in the car, both of which in Massachusetts at the time, between age 16 and 18, you're not allowed to drive after midnight nor drive other people who are under 21.
After 6 months having your license, you're not allowed to drive anyone else in the car.
I think that's changed.
Oh,
when I got my license, it was a little different. Again, this was a long time ago.
What was the penalty?
And, well, none. What was it supposed to be?
What happened to you?
Nothing, because the officer that had stopped us got called away to some domestic violence and said, if it weren't for the fact that a guy was beating his wife with a baseball bat right now, you would be in trouble. Go straight home. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200 was the way he said it to me. And that is exactly what I did. And then I waited till my 18th birthday to drive after midnight.
Yeah, I think that's the right approach because obviously, I mean, if you're not drinking or whatever else, just go home safe.
Go home. That was the idea. Oliver wrote in, hey guys, what was the time you did something really embarrassing and nobody noticed? I have slipped on ice and fallen many times. Sometimes people have noticed and sometimes people haven't. And if you can imagine, that cartoonish thing where you slip and papers just go everywhere around you.
Like on a banana peel or
like
something.
Slipping on a banana peel. I've had a couple falls like that, which fortunately I was young enough where I think if that happened now, I would probably be more seriously injured. But when you're like 16 and you fall, it's not nearly as big of a deal as when you're an adult. So I've had a couple of those. I've definitely had situations where I've been on like my Bluetooth phone when I'm driving around. So I'm not physically holding my phone and I'm having a very animated conversation. And then I notice that someone next to me is looking over and I must look completely nuts because I'm having a very animated conversation in my car. Although people know about Bluetooth.
Right.
Clearly, I was attracting attention by what I was doing where people were looking at me like I was doing something really, really odd. And listen, how many times have I embarrassed myself on the David Pakman Show, which are now part of the public record and on YouTube for all to see? The most embarrassing things I've done and nobody noticed, I guess, are the times where I do a story that I should be embarrassed by and people don't notice. Although I guess it doesn't happen that often. I don't know.
You have an entire archive. I mean, just last week you meant to say Mitch McConnell,
and
course,
I said bitch McConnell,
leader of the Republicans in the Senate, and you said bitch McConnell. I mean, I was personally offended.
Do you have any times where you did something very embarrassing and nobody noticed?
Yeah. Well, I don't think anyone noticed. So I had to make a 2-hour drive, which I was really not prepared for. I should have probably went to the bathroom before this.
Yeah.
Needless to say, I had to go about an hour and a half into the trip, and I was stuck in deadlock traffic. There was no sign of me getting out of that anytime soon.
Right.
So I had to make do with what I had, and what I had was a normal-sized plastic water bottle, maybe around this size.
Okay.
So while driving, we're kind of stopped, though, because it's deadlock traffic. I urinated into the bottle, but the bottle was not big enough. So I had to dump the bottle of urine out the window and go at it again.
Okay.
I think 2 times was enough. But yeah, I mean, that was pretty bad. That was pretty bad.
I think that you don't have to worry about any other scandal you've ever had on the show as of right now.
Yeah, I mean,
I think all of
those 2 stories are pretty bad.
I think all of those scandals, Keurigate, and what are I don't even, listen, I can't even remember the other scandals now.
The middle name controversy.
Middle name controversy.
Cat Outdoors.
Catgate, the entire thing. I'm having trouble even remembering why we cared about those, given this new story that you've told. Okay, that does it for today. Major bonus show today. Tune in. How do you get the bonus show? It's very easy. You sign up for membership at davidpakman.com/membership. Once you sign up, that's it. Then you can get the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.